Razia, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Thank you for having me.
So you have been an outspoken activist against Bill 21 in Quebec. You're from Quebec yourself. So tell me a little bit about, and tell our audience, what Bill 21 is.
So Bill 21 is a bill that was proposed by the CAQ government, which is currently the party that's ruling in Quebec. And it is a ban on all religious symbols in certain careers that represent the government. So they've narrowed it down to anyone who is in a position of authority with the police. So police officer, some lawyers that work for governments as well, and then teachers. And obviously, having a lot of visible minorities that do wear religious symbols in education, and aspiring, men and women who also want to be police officers have been affected by this. So this bill was proposed earlier in the year, it passed, and so now it's being challenged, and that's the current state that it's at. The National Council of Canadian Muslims has just won the ability to make the bill stay, so they're going to appeal it again, and our goal is to have it, while the bill is being challenged, for it not to be law, because right now it is law. So a lot of Muslim women, Sikhs, Jewish men as well, who really keep up, who are in education or lawyers, are not able to get jobs in September or continue applying or to excel in their current positions. So a lot of people who, the framing of the law is that if you were already a teacher, then you're okay, but you can't get promoted. And if you are applying for new jobs, or you're a student teacher who's trying to do your internship, you can't continue. You'd have to do it in the private sector. So that's like the bill in a nutshell.
So how are people responding to that? Are they, thinking of moving to other places? Are they removing their religious symbols, as it's called, religious symbols? We don't. I'm wearing a hijab, but I don't consider it a religious symbol, right?
It's part of your identity. It's not.
Yes, and part of your personal conviction as well, right?
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
But
and the bill's very vague and really clarifying what a religious symbol is. There was an article, I think it was put out in the Gazette, if I'm not mistaken, where they were mocking it. They're like, now they're saying an engagement ring is a religious symbol. So
or I heard people asking about tattoos, for example.
Yeah, that's it. Because what does that mean to you? Is it something religious? So, the conversation.
And how far do you want to police?
Absolutely. And I think that's where it's going to be long conversation of if this does stay, just the tactic. And it's not new. This is a sad reality. All of Canada is always, on one spectrum, on one page, and then Quebec's always very unique. So this is a conversation that's been ongoing in Quebec for the last 10 years.
So you're from Quebec, right?
I always take that with a grain of salt, because I'm originally Ontarian. I moved to Quebec 10 years ago, but yes, since I've been there, and yes, it's my second home or first home, it's a conversation that's been coming up with other parties. So I think that's where a lot of our, religious groups and minorities, we really have to have that wake-up call that this isn't going to end right here. So even if this bill gets challenged and comes down, it's a conversation that's happening. It's really, tip of the iceberg of a larger problem we have in Quebec.
So Quebec always says that we don't understand them, right? So,
or that we Quebec. Don't have a racism issue.
Tell me what's going on, what they're thinking in Quebec that we don't perhaps get.
There's obviously a lot of conversation around the Quebec and French identity, and they're very sensitive and insecure about making sure that stays, and that it's not. It's not molded to something, or looks different than what they think French Canadians should look like. And there's a lot of fear of the unknown. That's the reality. Outside of Montreal and Quebec City, there are very few minorities that you'll ever see. They've never even met a Muslim. And so a lot of the fear is propagated by just the unknown and not having those conversations, and the propaganda that's put out feeding that fear. I think there's so many layers to it in terms of Quebec just is very unique. The French identity is very important to them. And it's about having more, outreach and conversations. And that's not necessarily the burden of, Muslims or Jews or Sikhs to do it. I think it's the government's responsibility to facilitate that, given that Quebec has the highest rate of Islamophobia in Canada.
Yes, and I understand. I was looking at some stats. The Montreal police has said that their hate crimes have increased.
Yeah, and not just in Montreal. Montreal and Quebec City are in the top 5 cities in all of Canada with the highest crimes when it comes to Islamophobia. So there is something to discuss there. And like I said, Quebec is very sensitive around those issues, and it's really difficult to have those conversations when someone doesn't want to accept that there is a problem, right?
Yeah, how do you start to have those conversations? We understand, for example, that a recent survey has been done, which shows that in the rest of Canada, most people are against Bill 21.
Yeah.
Whereas in Quebec, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
You know, so many people are
So
for Bill 21.
I think also the framing, and the government has used that tactic actually to push the bill. Like you see, all of Quebec is supporting it, they're for this. But I think it's really important to step back and say, well, what was the question that was posed to people when it was framed that they're supporting this bill? I think that's really important. So I think there might have been some leading in the question. So I would be interested in seeing like an independent group do that research. And do a poll to see what the rest of Quebec thinks about this bill. But yes, that's been really put forward that a majority of Quebec is behind this bill. And it's really difficult to swallow, like the disenfranchisement you feel, the second-class citizen that is created within especially teachers and just minorities. Like you feel that the day that bill passed, it was a very heavy day for a lot of us in Quebec. And just to know that like you're not considered, because you don't fit that mold, you're not considered part of Quebec, or you're not considered part of the identity when very much your roots are established there. And it gives a far greater message, right, to the province, to this country as well. So it's really disheartening. We knew it was coming. Like I said, the conversations that had happened, the Liberals tried to introduce something on a much watered down version last year. Before that, we had Pauline Marois also, her government that tried to push something forward. So it's just always been there in the background in Quebec, and then now it's just been brought at the forefront. And you can't ignore that the backdrop it happened with the Quebec City shooting, with the New Zealand attacks that happened this year. And instead of learning from those and trying to facilitate community conversations so we never see those things happen again, to have something like this is taking 20 steps backwards. And
so Premier Vincent Legault has said that this legislation is actually moderate. 90% of jobs wouldn't be affected. So how would you respond? I feel like there's this big divide between what Quebecers are saying and what the rest of Canada is saying, and what Muslims are saying, for example, and other people who wear religious garments.
Yeah. I think when he says moderate, it's obviously like his definition and whatever that may be. Like he obviously doesn't understand the importance and the spirit of why people wear clothing that he classifies as religious symbols. And I also think that it's creating, like there was no problem, and there was actually a lot of teachers who came out and spoke, and not just teachers who wore religious symbols. They came out and said, we know our Muslim coworkers, our colleagues, this has never been an issue. Like there's never been a child who's, been affected by this. Like they appreciate and, love their teachers for their skills and, what they embody in everything like an educator should have. So to create a problem when there isn't one, that's also problematic. And so there was no study or stat that the CAQ government ever brought forward that was like, oh, well, this happened, and so therefore there is a need. And I think that's something to be questioned as well, and it has been, but it hasn't unfortunately led. There's never been a conversation of, so they had public hearings, and I think out of like the 30 or so people that they had, there were I think 2 Muslim women who actually wore a hijab, and one Sikh individual who was brought in by another organization, because they actually did not bring any Muslim organizations or even Sikh organizations for those public hearings. It was actually people who were pro the bill. So it hasn't been a fair advisory council. They've never spoken and had those conversations and had religious minorities at the table. Like Muslims have not been asked to be at that table. So they're just they're just sending this bill down the tunnel, and I think it's really dismissing the voice of those who will be affected.
I mean, my concern is, why do we care what people are wearing on their heads? There's a lot more to what a person thinks beyond what they're thinking, what they're wearing.
Yeah, and if it's never affected their ability to perform at work, why is that? Why are you holding them back from that?
And we know that the bill actually affects minorities disproportionately, right?
Who already face racism, and on top of that, add this other layer.
So I've heard some Muslims say, well, we want Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to speak out more strongly. What do you think would be the right message that Justin Trudeau conveys to people?
And I think that's the challenge we face because it's election year, so everyone's playing it very safe. And I think there's a lot more that our Prime Minister could do. regardless of them using the notwithstanding clause or not, I think at a federal level, we need to see stronger voices and support that we're not forgotten, that, the premier can't just get away with passing such a discriminatory bill that violates the most basic human rights of Canadians. So I think that support could look like just being more vocal about it, rallying up his MPs that aren't in Quebec to take a firmer stance on it. We've had very little engagement on that. There were a few MPs that spoke up, but that was it. So I think we could see a lot more vocal support. I think just having other premiers also across the country. There was just one or two out of all the provinces that actually did speak up and say that people are welcome to our province and we would never pass such a bill. But I think there's a lot stronger message that can do. He's the Prime Minister of Canada, and I think there's accountability there, especially for the citizens of Quebec as well. So it's been disheartening that because it's election year, we haven't heard a lot around that.
Now, a lot of the impact has been on religious minorities, as we've said, and they've kind of taken the front and center role to try and advocate against Bill 21 or fight against Bill 21. So what would your message be to the wider community, people who are watching and thinking, well, what can I do? I'm just an ordinary person. What's your advice? And
then that's a conversation that comes up a lot, even within Muslim communities, where people are like, well, I know National Council of Canadian Muslims, you guys are doing the legal charge. What can I do as a parent or a member of this community? And so even with the non-Muslim community, we had some town halls in Montreal, and we had a few trickle in. And I think it's really important, not to compare this to the civil rights movement, but when Martin Luther King said, like, it's not the voices of those that are against us will remember, but, and I'm totally butchering the quote, but it's the silence that we'll remember, right? And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of. Like, I think everyone has a part to play. So there are so many teachers that will not be affected by this, but they should be taking a stance. They should hold their board accountable and say, we are not going to accept our coworker or potential coworker being hired because of this discriminatory bill. So I think within our circles, within our institutions, organizations, we have every ability. So with parents especially, I was having conversation. I was like, you guys can pull together and go and have a conversation with your school board and say, what stance are you taking? Because the English school board was actually very forward in saying we will not support this bill, we will not apply it, and we'll take the penalty that comes with it. Whereas the French board never spoke up. And there's so many teachers and students that we affected. I mean, imagine a Muslim student or Sikh student sitting in that classroom and is being told, this bill has passed and now won't be able to go down a career path that they perhaps want to be an educator or a lawyer or a police officer. And, now they're being told, well, those don't apply to you, but we're going to give it to everyone else, right? So those parents need to be very vocal in holding their school boards account. And that didn't happen. We didn't see that pressure applied. Whereas they can. They are part of that community. Their children go to that school. That school board is accountable to you. So, I mean, there's so much power that we can have and create, I think, amplify our voices together. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that. And I think that's part in part to modern day where, we like to, and there's a recent term I heard, I forget what it's called, but it's like the armchair activist where we think if we like or share an article online, like somehow it's helping the cause.
It's not just that, but there are so many issues that we can possibly...
There are, and absolutely. But this one you could. So I had the parents...
Exactly, this is in Canada. It's
local, your child is going to a school that is going to be implementing this law. Like, have that conversation. Get the parents, the PTA, get them together and have it. So I had spoken to so many parents about that. And I was like, they're like, what can we do? I'm like, your child's going to school there. Get, 50, 60 parents together and be like, we want a meeting with the school board. We want a meeting with the principal. And just by communicating that with the principal, he can take that back, right? And have that conversation with the board, like, hey, I've got parents to answer to. We can't implement this. We need to put a press release out there. And so across the French boards, we did not hear that. And they're going to be implementing this if it's not challenged. So I think we do have the power within our capacities, no matter how small, but just get out there and talk, have those conversations, even if it's your neighbor. That's a big one, especially in Quebec, where there are so many Francophones who are supporting the bill because they've never met a Muslim. I myself have encountered, having a Francophone neighbor who wouldn't even respond to me saying hello. And slowly we just stayed at it. And, you know, it ended up by the time we moved, he actually had us over for dinner. And,
wow.
you know, yeah, like a friendship was formed. So like, again, I don't place that burden on the minorities. I don't think it's fair to say like, oh, Muslims and Sikhs and Jews, you guys should be doing more outreach. No, I think everyone has their part to play. So my message, not just to Muslim parents, I'm saying even those who won't be affected, you have a part to play. You need to apply that pressure as well, because this is a message your children are going to be learning in the school as well.
So let's hope that we can all work together to,
Absolutely.
you know, eventually overturn this legislation. I
have hope that we will challenge it and it will be brought down and it will set an example. And I think for once and for all, we'll put this to rest. And there's been actually a lot of allyship created from this. There's been like religious organizations that have come together in Montreal that have never happened before. There's a sense of urgency that everyone felt, and that was powerful. So I'm hoping that momentum, you know, we can carry out and see it flourish into other aspects and never have to, you know, face this kind of bill again or have these kind of conversations in the public sphere.
I'm going to hold on to that hope.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Razia, for joining us.
My pleasure.